Hello and welcome to our Day 3 update here at the Rolex Sydney Hobart Yacht Race. So the weather, it was pretty chilly out there this morning as we were capturing line honours out there on the water. It was 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning, so we're a bit chilly. But now that the sun's come out, it's afternoon, it's a little bit more forgiving at the moment.
Yeah, and we shouldn't mention how much sleep we've had in between times. So
yeah, you might be able to see the bags under our eyes. Please forgive us.
We can hardly complain. It's pretty good to be part of this.
Yes, absolutely. So 3 yachts have crossed the finishing line overnight. First, of course, being Law Connect taking line honours. They crossed the line at 2:35 a.m, which means they finished the race in 1 day, 13 hours.
And a few minutes and things, but yeah.
Yeah.
Outside race record, sadly. So.
Yes. Then next across the line was Celestial V70. They are currently clubhouse leader IRC overall. Do you want to tell us exactly what that means, Cross?
Yes, I know. It's a little confusing, isn't it, clubhouse leader? But what effectively it means is in the overall standings, with yachts still at sea, they are currently holding the lead position. So what that means is all the other yachts at sea that might be able to knock her off will have a certain time they've got to be here by. Judging by what's going on further down in Storm Bay, it's looking pretty good for Sam Haynes and that boat. So she'll get converted to winner overall when eventually it's clear no other boat can beat her.
Yes, we've watched those sort of light wins over the afternoon, haven't we? So then, of course, third across the finishing line was Wild Thing 100. And unfortunately, they lost a little bit of time there due to damaged battens in the mainsail.
Yeah.
But, of course, they still crossed the line at a beautiful sunrise, which I'll talk about in a moment.
Yeah.
So before we move on, we got some great interviews on the docks as the crew arrived here. Do you want to tell us a little bit, sort of summarise those interviews for us, Cross?
Yeah, just very quickly, there were some common threads to the interviews we did with all 3 of those finishers. I think, understandably, the first thing was, they all talked about was the deep shock at the loss of 2 sailors at sea on the first night. I mean, these guys in these boats are elite. They are professional sports people, but they're out there with Corinthians and they have this extraordinary respect for their fellow sailors who get out there and do this stuff and get here, just getting here. And I think there was genuinely a real sense of shock, and of course that translated into quite a muted sort of there was nothing false about it. I think everybody just felt, it was great to be here, but, that's just so sad. Yeah. The second one, I think, was the discussion about maintaining the asset.
Yes, I kept hearing this and I had to ask Cross earlier. Sorry for my ignorance, but what does that mean?
Maintaining the asset.
In case other viewers don't know what that means, can you tell us what that means?
Exactly. A sort of piece of bureaucratic language brought to sailing, but effectively what it really means is looking after the boat and the people. I'm not quite sure you should call people an asset, but there you go. The concept really is about deciding when you push and when you hold. And on that first night, really to be able to get here with that much wind going downwind, they really had to just ease back. They're not in full race mode. They've got to know they've got to get through that first night. So it's maintaining both the boat and then the people on it and putting them in no more danger and risk and so forth than they have to. So that's largely what it really means. And of course, those guys know how to do that.
Great, thanks.
The third one, I think, was the jibes, and we'll come back to that in a moment because that's really interesting. Jibes at really high speeds. When you're sailing in 35 knots, you're in a full gale, and you've not got much sail up, and that's really not going to matter because you've still got to get that mainsail across and actually come out the other side, and they talked a lot about that. And then the final one, I think, was the sort of sail damage. And obviously even steering, like Wild Thing 100 came not only with sail damage, but one wheel, which was just being wheeled around, which wasn't of much use to them. But anyway, they managed pretty well.
Great. So who's next due in?
We're sort of hoping to be going out and seeing Whisper, No Limit and Cara come in. Smuggler's a little further behind. They're really caught up in some very light airs off between Cape Raoul. They're sort of pottering around at 2-3 knots. There's breeze up here at the top of the river. It's sort of out of the south-southwest. So once they can get through that, they'll be here during the afternoon. Yep.
Yeah, great. So that means we've got sort of 4 yachts still finishing in daylight today, which means that we've got 68 still out on course.
Oh, I'm impressed. So with not much sleep, you got the numbers.
Oh yeah, I did. I didn't get them back to front or anything. How good's that? And those yachts sort of range all the way from Cape Raoul up to Eden off the coast of New South Wales. So there's a few. Sorry, that we've just got a seaboat in the
landing in the background.
And then so the Beast one, where a big cluster of yachts are, is all around sort of the middle of Bass Strait there. What are they getting weather-wise?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So on the northern end, those ones that are sort of closer to the Victorian and New South Wales coast, they're probably sort of getting reasonable westerlies. There's still quite a belt of nor'wests coming through the strait. So those in the sort of southern half of the strait, they're getting a fair bit of breeze still. And then as you come down the coast, it's getting lighter. I just had a quick look before this just to see what sort of speeds. There were very few boats doing more than about 10 knots at the moment. That's actually probably great for them, because the one thing you do when it lightens up is you just go into major recovery mode. There wouldn't be a boat there that doesn't have some form of damage, clearing up to do down below, getting water out of the boat. Every boat will have water in it. Doesn't matter what you do to try and seal it in those conditions. So a lot of recovery for those guys, just making sure they're good to get in. And then it's sort of the weather, if I can segue into that. The top end, it's staying lightish, sort of top end of Bass Strait. Bottom end still 20 knots, but that's all going to fade as they come further south, and we're going to get that kind of amoeba-like light airs, that blue patch we were showing on Predict Wind. Yep. That's still modelling around down in the southern end and towards Maria Island and further south. So there's still a lot of tactics, navigation to play out for, pretty hard yards there. And then 8 a.m. tomorrow, then yes, a bit more breeze, probably out of the northwest.
Yeah, good.
And the standings, I suppose we should talk about those. The board's getting a little bit tricky to see now because we've scrubbed all over it. But overall, obviously, line honours, Law Connect first. Celestial, the clubhouse leader, as we've said before. Really impressive work from Smuggler in Division 1. She's still holding lead on that with Caro behind her, although there could be a bit played out now in the next few hours there. Div 2, Serene, the Bill Henson's boat, the JPK 45, that's impressive. They're doing really well. Div 3, the French JPK 1180 Cody, they've done really well. Boy, they're race hardened. That boat was sailed all the way from France, all the way around the world in various moves there. And then Div 4, Rupert Henry's Mistral doing really well. Many of you may not be familiar with who Rupert Henry's sailing with. He's typically sailed with Greg O'Shea last year, with Jack Boutel, very, very experienced British offshore sailors, and our seaplane here is
sorry about the background noise.
Doing its best to interrupt us here, but hopefully we can keep the mics close. She's doing really well. Mistral's leading Div 4. His co-skipper on that one is a Frenchman, and I hope I'm going to get this right, but I think his name's pronounced Constantin Duguerre. And these are names that are perhaps not in the Vendée Globe side of scenario, but these are people who've done many Pacific Ocean races and so forth, class 40s and smallers, two-handers, deeply experienced people. So, Rupert would have a top man there. And then in Div 5, we've got Min River, Zhang Lin, who's also working with a Frenchman, Francois Guiffon. So just quickly down through the rest of them, double-handers, obviously Mistral holding that one. Hutzbach in 12th on line honours, that's pretty impressive, and Mistral 17th. I mean, that's amazing, two 40-footers up in those high numbers just on line honours. In the PHS, Just for Love, that's Scott Lovell's boat, the Tassie 451. And in the Corinthian IRC, Serene again. And then PHS Navy 1. In the double-handers overall then, we've got Mistral, Min River, Disco Trooper, and then delighted to see that Annette Hesselmans and Sophie Schneider, timing's perfect here.
We've timed this well, yes.
Annette Hesselmans and Sophie Schneider, the double-handers on Fika, who are preparing for the Melbourne Osaka. And so that's going to be good preps for them. And then the Sydney 38s, I think there's 6 of them, and Pulpito is the leader of that. So I think we've pretty much gone end to end on all the results so far.
Great. Now that seaplane's a bit quieter. So yeah, it was just to recap a little bit about our morning, it was very dark, as you probably saw from our live stream there, as Law Connect was crossing the finishing line. But Jake and I went back out as Celestial and Wild Thing were coming in, and they were arriving just as the sun was rising. So it's going to be really great to see some beautiful shots come out of that. So let's talk a little bit more about a couple of the common things that were coming up in those interviews earlier today. You wanted to talk a little bit more about the damage on board, about jibes. There was some interesting takes on that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, boat design, which came a lot in this race. So tell us a little bit more about those 3 things.
Absolutely. And I should say, in talking about in the dark, our apologies. It is really hard at any times when you're coming up the river here to get close to these boats. In the dark, it's even harder. They're not very lit up. The boat drivers have to make decisions as they must. There's a safety issue there. So we probably weren't as close as we'd have liked to be, but hopefully you got the atmosphere certainly when they were crossing the line.
Yeah.
So yeah, those three things quickly to wrap up. Talking about damage. So we talked a bit about that yesterday. I think what was interesting talking to the guys that have got in, very different scenarios but the same set of issues. So remarkably, I mean, Law Connect is a battleship. That thing is so robust. They actually didn't blow up any of their sails, which is extraordinary. Sailmakers will be pleased about that one, obviously. Whereas for Wild Thing 100, as you said, took a jibe and broke pretty much all of her buttons, and that wasn't the only thing that happened. She lost the steering wheel and all sorts of stuff.
It was interesting to hear. Sorry to interrupt, but to hear them say, "No, we'll just get into that finishing line, whatever it took."
Exactly, and I think that's great credit to Warrow and his team on Grant Warrington, his team on Wild Thing 100, because that boat's going through various transitions. It'll get a new rig in February as well, but with all of that damage to get here, that speaks volumes about their experience as well. So there's that. The jibes, I think some of the most interesting discussion, we asked Jack McCartney, who's one of the drivers on Celestial, about what it feels like to drive a Volvo 70, and those things are built for ocean racing. They just do mile week after week in the Southern Ocean there, and they are so rugged. Sam Haynes was saying, actually a lot more comfortable down below certainly than a TP52, but just so reliable, hugely reliable. Now the jibe, so anybody who's done any dinghy sailing will know that when you go into a jibe in high winds, high-o winds, what you want to be able to do is to time the jibe with getting all of the load out of the sail. So what that really means is you've got to be going as fast as you can be going, preferably on a wave, so that you're taking the load out of the sail, because what you've got to be able to do is to get that sail in and then let it go out the other side, and also when it goes out the other side that it doesn't go fast out the other side. So those people will be familiar with that sort of S-curve you have to do as you go through a jibe so that it doesn't slam on the other side. But what was really interesting for me was Jack McCartney's incredibly experienced driver, had Luke Parkinson on the helm as well, another round-the-world racer, and Jack said when it got to the jibes they handed over to Rob Greenhalgh. And Rob Greenhalgh, British, internationally famous British sailor. All three of those guys come from skiffs as well, which is interesting, 18-footers and so forth, was that they handed over to him because he had, of all of them, the most experience of the absolute moment where you actually take the turn. And usually that's on the top of the wave, exactly the right turn, that the thing's not loaded up, that the two guys on the runners can get them in the middle and let it out. And this is where the batten damage happens, and I suspect from what Warrow was saying this happened on Comanche, is if you get it wrong at any point, and it's so easy to get it wrong, we're talking seconds here about a twitch in one direction or another or a sudden gust. If you get that wrong and the sail goes out the other side and slams hard, and particularly if it hits the stays, that's when you break battens.
Wow.
And interesting to hear Tony Mutter and also Chris Lewis talking about that, making those jibes. And you could hear in Tony, he said, we did 5 jibes and we nailed them all. That was how hard it was for the top flight professional people, was to feel the relief they'd done that.
Wow.
Pretty impressive stuff. And then finally, boat design. It says huge amount that the most rugged boat in the race is here and won on line honours, and one of the most rugged boats you'll ever go ocean racing on, a Volvo 70, is currently the clubhouse leader. So they were big takeaways for me.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So that wraps up our update today. We will bring you further updates as the race continues, and keep an eye on our social media for all of those more information to come.
Good.
Thanks.
See you then.